and thank you for joining us. I'm conscious always with these lunch and learns that time is tight and everybody's committed to a maximum of 15 minutes. So I'm going to move quickly through it. Risk management by objectives topic. So I suppose the first thing I would look to is a definition of risk. You've seen this before, I'm sure, with Jerry. So it's the effect of uncertainty on objectives. There are other versions, but basically it's the same thing. And this is from the 31,000 standard. Risk can be upside or downside. People talk about opportunity risk, and that's important to remember that. It has many sources, internal to the organization and external to the organization. The internal ones are generally the known knowns. The external ones, you can get variables. Significant thing about risk is it must be managed. Now, when I say managed, it can be taken, risk has to be taken, and is a lot, but it has to be taken with caution. Mitigated where it's prudent to do so. So there are certain things that you won't take on, and you will mitigate to make sure that they don't or can't occur. One of the things that most of the businesses that we deal with we're conscious of is that the failure to comply risks, that's the regulatory and legal stuff, tend to be the ones that get the most attention. And that's because there's a credible threat of enforcement out there. But to tie this back to the objectives of the organization, if there are no objectives, there's no risk. And that's a fairly controversial kind of statement because people tend to find it hard to get their head around the completeness of that. But basically, there's no consequence to failure if there's no objective. And to either achieve or prevent something from happening, if there's nothing stated as we will do or we are, then there's no consequence to failure. I'll go back to the definition again for a minute. And really what I've done with the next bullet here is to talk about the why we are here, to do what, by when. And these are the things that can be uncertain, where some of the uncertainty lies when you begin to talk and think about an objective statement. Most of the risks, as I said earlier on, are known knowns, and I've listed some of them here. The variables come from external things like Lehman's collapse, the effect that had on various businesses, for example. Another one we would cite in training would be the volcano in Iceland a number of years ago that more or less shut down the aviation sector. That kind of thing, these things that are beyond your control. Hurricane Ian, the recent hurricane in the US, was another one that had consequences beyond what would have been known. Those kind of things occur. But generally, most of the risk will be fairly well rehearsed at this stage. The objectives then are distinct from mission statements. So a lot of organizations have mission statements and vision statements, and those generally are the realm of the directors and the senior leadership and the stakeholders. The big why are we here's and the big what are we here to do's. And then they become defined by the strategic intent. So a strategic plan is developed, and it's from the strategic plan that the objectives of the organization emerge. And then the objectives are operationalized by the senior management team and then down through the organization. A lot of objectives in a sector are common. So you'll find that in fact, most of the objectives, if you take a sector like the insurance sector, for example, most of the objectives in that space will be common. They'll be talking about growth. They'll be talking about particularly the regulatory stuff that they have to comply with. And then the pieces that are unique to the organization become important. So what you're looking at here are the context, the size of the organization, the resources it has, the capacity, and the aims and ambitions. Now, I talk about aims and ambitions. Again, this is informed by where you're at. So you can be a very small player, or you might be a startup, and your ambitions will be different completely from the market leader who's been well established in the sector for a long time. So the organization's circumstance will define, determine, and affect the objectives as they're developed. The management by objectives term was first used by a guy called Peter Drucker in the 50s, and it was actually a methodology, if you like, to engage employees in the achievement of the organization's objectives by sharing those objectives and sometimes the development of those objectives with the employees. It probably fell out of the post-war American industrialization, where they had the shipyards and the war effort, if you like, and a very clear objective and people could understand it. We talk a little bit about those objectives, and when Drucker wrote his theory in the 50s, it was almost as though it was a new concept. But to be quite honest, the pyramids could not have been built without some serious objectives. So it's been there, it's in us, if you like, and he put definition on it. And subsequent to that, the development of this, what they call SMART objectives. I'm sure most of you, if not all of you, will have heard about it. That the objective setting should be specific, measurable, achievable, and I put in the term agreed here, because sometimes if a management team thinks it's achievable and the organization doesn't believe it's achievable, what happens is you get a confusion, and generally the non-achievement becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So there needs to be a level of agreement that the thing is achievable. If it's a mission impossible, then the motivation gets affected and all sorts of things start to happen. It needs to be realistic so they can say, yeah, okay. And by realistic, what really is happening here is that there's a commitment to resource that, yeah, we could do this. I mean, you think about putting man on the moon, think about that space program. It was resourced, and it was resourced from the outset. So everybody believed, yeah, it's dangerous, it's risky, but it's achievable. So internal objectives need to be like that, and they need to be time bound. You can't let them go on forever. Somebody needs to put a stake in the ground to say this will be done by then, and that makes them far easier to achieve and far more effective. I just put here a typical objective, and it's a simple one: sales growth objective. And what you're looking at is grow the sales by 20%. The next issue is to do the SMART test. So if you go back to your SMARTs and say, yeah, does it tick all these boxes? And then, having agreed that, yeah, this is a reasonable objective, have a look at the consequence of failure to achieve the objective. So what happens if we don't achieve this? What happens if we make 10%? What happens if we don't grow? And begin to think through that process. Now you're kicking into the risk assessment part of this process. And the likelihood is the other element, if you like, in the risk assessment. So you have two elements to it. And it's worth going through the process for both on the objective. So if you look at this, take that high level objective. So you're going to grow the 20%. This is the SMART test on it. Define the target. And what this is doing is looking for it being specific. So they're saying 20%. And this is informing the context. So last year we did 11%, and there is a market. So, for example, we've come across organizations where they're 96% market share. Not much point in them having a growth objective. The second one, the SMARTs here, the sales team forecast every month, and they report the actuals weekly. So there's no surprises in the measurement. If it starts to go wrong, you know it starts to go wrong. The next one, there's the addition, this is additional resources to support in March, and there's agreement that it's doable. And you can see, yes, we can survive 15%, but we could get to 25. So this is recognizing that there's upside in it as well. And the time-bound thing, it's nailed down to the end of the year. So that's effectively confirming that the objective is a SMART one. And then the next piece of the process is the alignment. So to align the objectives with what matters to the organization. Now, what matters to the organization are, in fact, for many of you who have existing risk registers and been through this process, it's the impact category. And that's basically what matters. And what we tend to do in some of our workshops is an alignment exercise that looks at what matters to the organization, and then looks at things that the objectives of the organization, and sometimes they're misaligned. But develop the risk criteria. What you're trying to do is develop a set of risk criteria or numbers on a 5x5 scale that gives you a sense of where what matters and where the objective. If you miss the objective, what's the impact or consequence to the organization? And then visit the objectives or revisit the objectives to confirm that everything that matters to the organization is reflected. So everything that matters has an objective. What matters will have trickled down from the strategic plan. Everything that's in that strategic plan with an intent should have a corresponding objective. And vice versa. Sometimes we come across situations where there's no objective for some of what matters. And sometimes we have objectives and nothing matters. When we see it most frequently in is people. The organization will say that people matters to it, and every time you do what matters, people are included. And you go look for the objective. There's no development objective, there's no retention objective for the people. So it's not the objectives don't align with the stated intent. Now, that could be informal, that they don't actually write it down, but it's very useful when it is written down. Finally, what I've done here, and I'm very conscious of time, is I've just put up a set of typical risk criteria and a small heat map that shows you where the consequence line and the likelihood line are. And I'm going to move to questions and answers. And if anybody's got any questions about or answer questions, I might have the answers. All quiet. Well, if there's no questions, what I'd say to you is, I think in the fifth one of these, Jerry did a risk criteria, lunch and learn. I think it's number 5. And if anybody wants to go back and sort of this ties with that. So if anybody wants to go back and find that, you're more than welcome. But if anybody has a question or anything that we can offer that's useful, more than happy to send you an email if you flip something into me at the email here is paul.o'brien@calqrisk.com or into the inquiries anytime. I have one question. Oh, it's just somebody saying thank you. Well, you're more than welcome and have a nice lunch.